on today's StoryBeat.
Well, the best I can say is create inventory. Don't think that the first thing that you do is precious. Don't harbor the illusion that that is going to be the thing that is going to be, that's going to send you into the stratosphere. Don't try to second guess trends. And I think the really important thing is don't doubt your own life.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Well, I'm so very happy that my guest today, Hal Ackerman, is making his second appearance on StoryBeat. Hal spent 30 years teaching screenwriting in UCLA's legendary screenwriting program. Along with Richard Walter and Lou Hunter, Hal helped launch the careers of many dozens of writers whose work you've seen on screens, large and small. Hal has sold film and television material to all the outlets. His screenplay, Holmeyer's Bridge, holds the unofficial Guinness record for having been continuously optioned for 20 consecutive years, owned during that stretch by 2 Academy Award-winning producers, 2 Tony Award-winning producers, and others. His short fiction has appeared in numerous literary journals. Sweet Day was recorded by the late Robert Forster. Concrete Charley and the Golden Boy won the 2020 Sports Literate Sport Short contest. Hal's written 3 soft-boiled murder mystery novels about an aging counterculture PI named Harry Stein. The first of those, Stein Stung, won a Lovie Award for Best First Novel. Subsequently, Hal published Stein Stoned, and more recently, Smoke and Lather. I thoroughly enjoyed reading all 3 Stein books and can tell you Hal delivers a unique take on the detective genre. Funny while being dramatic, Hal's writing is cleverly brilliant and brilliantly clever. I highly recommend all 3 Harry Stein books to you. Hal's also known for publishing the highly informative and truly useful book, Write Screenplays That Sell the Ackerman Way. If you want insight from one of the foremost screenwriting teachers of the last half century, make a point to check it out. Hal's one-man play, Testosterone, How Prostate Cancer Made a Man of Me, renamed Prick, won the William Saroyan Award for Drama and was named Best Play at the 2012 New York Solo Festival. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm proud to say I was fortunate to have been one of Hal's many students while I was attending UCLA's graduate screenwriting program. Once again, it's a true joy for me to have the great Hal Ackerman as my guest on StoryBeat today. Hal, welcome back to the show.
What a great introduction. Thank you. I'd love to meet this guy.
Well, I'll have to introduce you sometime. So let's go back just a little tiny way. I know you retired from teaching a few years ago, and I'm wondering if you have found that the extra time that you now have to be creative liberating, or do you in any way miss the grind of teaching?
Both are true. Of course, there's more time available because I really did try to work as hard as I could to further the goals and creative processes of all the students I had. I took that quite seriously. Rightfully proud of the successes you included among the folks. I was able to write while I was doing it as well, but it's not only the time, but keeping all of the students' work in my head. And I was about to start a new project. At the time it was new. Now it's about 9 years old, and I finally have finished it, I hope. A novel that I was working on that was it was very, very different from anything I'd ever written before. And I thought, and maybe still think, it was far beyond my capabilities. It took a lot of research. It was a historical piece. And I just knew that I wouldn't be able to do both that novel and keep everything going on in my head and the students' work in my head. And I didn't want to give short shrift to either. I had taught, it was a nice round number, 30 years. And I thought, okay, time to leave. But unencumbered by that, yes, it does free up a lot of time and mental bandwidth. But I do miss it. I do miss it. I've done some lectures and some guest speakerships, and I do some private consultations. it's really exciting to work with talented people. So yes, I do still miss it. I do.
Well, you get a little touch of it by being a consultant, and you get a little touch of it by doing lectures and so on, but it's not the same as being in the classroom, is it?
It is not the same. And I'll tell you, after I retired from UCLA and moved to New York, which is where I'm from, I did do a couple of stints. I taught for a year at NYU and at Brooklyn College in their graduate schools.
Do you think that your years of teaching has influenced the way that you write? Do you write differently because of your teaching?
I think so. I never was taught screenwriting. I was a playwright, and I had a very uncomfortable experience as a writer, as a playwright with a play that I had written that I don't know what to go into, but a director and producer that became attached to it suddenly wanted to grab writing credit as well. Anyway, it was a bad scene, and so I decided I had to come to a place with more integrity. So I came to Los Angeles.
Oh yeah, a lot more integrity there.
Exactly. But I knew nothing at all about screenwriting, about movies. I went to the movies just as a normal, regular person on Saturday night sometimes.
Hal, I'm sorry, you've never been a normal, regular person.
No, I said like one, not actually. So when I came here, all I brought with me, as credentials were my New York arrogance. I figured if I could write a play, which was hard, how hard could it be to write a movie? Couldn't John McEnroe learn to play ping pong? That was my New York arrogance. Well, as Stanislavski said, when you think you know everything, prepare to have the next phase of your education. The first screenplay I wrote, or thought there was a screenplay, I remember, showed it to some agent or producer or something, and they said, well, this is really good dialogue. And I wasn't surprised to hear that. That was always my strength as a playwright. But the guy said, I can't see where your first act ends. And I just thought I was getting razzed. I knew movies didn't have acts because, you go to the theater, when an act comes, the curtain comes down, the lights come up, and you go out and have a cigarette. And that doesn't happen in the movie. So, yeah, it was an elbowing to the ribs of the new guy. Har, 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 act. So, again, who was the joke on? It was the joke on, the joke from New York. So I set out to try to learn what that meant. And I went to the movies. It was in the early 70s. You could still go to an afternoon show for like $1.50 or something like that, and had a little pen light with me. And I started writing down every event that took place, and started after a while to see, oh yeah, there is an act here. Here is something like a real gatepost, something that actually happens. And so I learned that structure. When I started teaching, that was the structure that I taught. And I think everyone has their own ideas about what structure is, but I think it was from consciously trying to teach myself what it was that I wanted to learn that I was then able to teach to students. And it taught me a great deal, because now I'm working with students and I'm able to see the same thing that those people saw in my stuff, where things were going wrong, where the structure failed. And I think that even now when I'm writing a novel, it somehow falls into a 3-act structure unconsciously. So I think that both really worked consciously and unconsciously and subconsciously, the teaching, the writing itself, because it's all the same thing, really. You write something new and you're teaching yourself how to write it.
That's true. You're always teaching yourself something new in the way you're doing it. So let me ask you, what do you think is structure? Because I go off of a fellow or your colleague in the school, Howard Suber. I go off of his definition of structure. It's not just Aristotle and 3 acts or beginning, middle, and end, but off of his definition of structure as well, which is it's the relationship of the pieces and parts to each other and to the whole, and that you have to have everything unified and sort of working as one meshed set of gears. How do you think of structure?
Well, I do think of it in terms of acts. And when I start to engage a story as events, as I start to just sort of gather up the things that are happening, I am not absolutely scrutinizing, but looking for those key points. And it's like if I'm planning to drive across country, let's just say, I know what my capacity is to a number of hours. I know how long the trip is, and I want to sort of plan out places where I'm going to stop and sleep for the night.
Sure.
And I guess so I'm sort of structuring the trip. And then once I decide of how far I can go and I look to see what's there, say, okay, that's going to be my end of my first act. But then it's not just the distance between New York and Indianapolis or, whatever that might be, but, why am I taking this trip? Is it to get there as fast as I can? Is it to see all the things along the way? Is it to meet some particular people? And in a kind of way, those are the same questions you're asking when you're writing a script. I know that I've come to a definition of what the end of a first act is, and roughly where it takes place. To me, it's where the bridge washes out, and you can never go back to where you were in the first place. It's like the point of no return, and it generally in movies happens around 30-minute, 30-page mark. So as I'm planning out my structure for the film, I'm looking ahead and thinking, okay, what is going to be the moment when Michael Corleone, shoots and kills those people in the restaurant? That's his point of no return. I've come to see the end of Act Two as the worst thing that can possibly happen to the character short of death. So when I look ahead, in the movie I'm trying to write, it's like, okay, what's the worst thing that happens to Juno in that movie Juno? Well, the people that she was going to have adopt her baby break up. Okay, so now I can lay that ahead of me and play toward that. Just like if you're driving someplace, you can say, okay, I got to make it to Reno by Thursday. What am I going to see along the way? How fast do I have to go? What can I skip? Where can I dwell for a while? And it's the same thing within structure. There are certain scenes that you have to really compress and allow the event just to simply take place so that you give breathing time to scenes that have a lot of nuance and change and things in it that take the time and then need the time. But you can't do that to every scene, otherwise you'll have a 7,000-page movie. But so you have to learn what goes in and what doesn't go in, what can be implied and inferred, and what needs to grow in front of that the audience has to really participate in. So to me, those are all the aspects of structure.
And you need all of them to work in concert, or it won't work as a whole.
Well, that's true of anything. It's true of your body. It's true of a car. Yeah. And it's absolutely true of a movie. Writers, I think, make themselves very aware of that. I mean, certainly writers that come through our classes make them very aware. And, that structure, it's a flexible, fluid thing. People can feel it in different ways. As long as they've, an Oldsmobile and a Studebaker, are different, but they each run in their own way. And different movies will have their own sense of structure, their own sense of pace. But however different they all are, and they can be, they all, as you say, they all have to have an internal integrity that creates a whole experience. And that, I think, is very much what a writer thinks about. And it's not always the thing that people think about once the script is written and gets out into the production world. Sometimes those important factors, well, not every movie feels like a really well-told story.
Well, that's right. You alluded earlier to your first script that the person that read it said your first act doesn't end. Where's the end of your first act?
Yeah.
So you needed to actually have that understanding of where it sort of breaks into a different place. And that's part of structure.
That is absolutely part of structure. And there are many very specific structural parts. Just, I mean, like you and I and most other human beings, we are all actually structured to the same geometric ratios. From our head to our chin is like 1/7 of us, and our torso is 4/7, and from knees to it all adds up to 7 parts. I think Michelangelo was the one who figured that out, or maybe it was Leonardo. And even though every one of us fits that very same geometry, every one of us is also individual and completely distinguishable from the other. And the same thing, I think, can be true about movie scripts, even though they may follow that geometric form. Let's just say roughly 30 pages to the first act, roughly to page 75 to the second act, and then to 110 to the third act. Even if every single movie had that exact same geometry, they could still be completely and absolutely different.
100% true.
Because of what's inside them. Just like what's inside you and me and everybody else is different. Our faces are different. Our aspects are different. The things we care about are different. The way in which we will respond to the exact same situations may be different. And that needs to be and can be and is true in the best of films, I think.
That's the difference for me between what we call form and format.
Yes.
And so there is a form to it, but not a format to it.
Yes.
So the format is repeatable, but the form is not actually repeatable. It's just a general things that we understand in communicating to one another. This is the form that a story takes. And without that form, people don't understand what we're saying or they don't understand the story. So you need it.
Yes, and the story itself doesn't understand itself. I mean, it doesn't deliver what the thing that a story needs to deliver, which is involvement and and empathy and all of those wonderful things that from early times on.
Well, novels can go off in many directions, and you can have many sidebars and things that can go forwards and backwards quite easily.
Yes,
But in a movie, there's a tendency toward it needing to be much more concise, much tighter, because it can't be sprawling. It can't go on for 1,000 pages. It has to have a certain time to it, or people are going to leave. So there is that difference in the form of a movie versus a novel. And you've done both quite well. And so my question to you is, do you have a preference when you're thinking about story? I know that you're now writing more prose and that's become your thing at the moment, but do you miss writing screenplays? Do you think about writing screenplays at all?
yes, I do. I actually have. Actually wrote one last year that I like quite a lot. I've tried, sending it around, and I'm still doing so. It's a wonderful form, and as I said, my first exposure, I guess, the first public thing that I wrote. Well, I used to write song parodies in junior high school and go around to classrooms and disrupt them as much as possible. But when I was in college, I wrote a full length musical, and I think you are somewhat familiar with that form.
I am. I am.
It is so exciting. I wrote an original book and lyrics, and a friend of mine wrote an original score, and it was done in a 500-seat theater at our college, and it was the first time anything had ever been done that way, all student stuff. That feeling of hearing 500 people laugh at something that that in my mind I thought might have been funny and wrote it down, and that momentum that derives itself in a musical when it's working is like nothing else really.
That's right.
The audience becomes one organism, and and you have them, and they're laughing, and they're with it, and they're just electrified, and it is so exciting. So movies can do that as well. I mean, it's publicly performed, whereas a novel, you don't get that same group feedback.
Not at all.
I like writing prose a lot. I think that for me, the writing of prose, just the writing part of it gives me more satisfaction than the writing part of a movie. But the second part, the give back in anything publicly performed, exceeds anything that can possibly happen in a novel, because people are reading it individually, and you just never know. You don't feel their response.
So you've also successfully written quite a few short stories and had those published too.
Yeah.
Do you like that form as well, the short form of prose, or is that more challenging to do than anything else?
I do like it. In fact, I've been lately writing what's being called flash fiction or sudden fiction, which is really compressed, like 500, 750 word stories, and I've had a few of them published, and it is really exciting because you have to really compress, and the result has to be the same as in something long, which is that it makes an impact. But you have to get character and situation and circumstance and drama and tension, all of it, but in 500 words or 700 words. It's a great challenge. I do really like it.
It's kind of like haiku, yeah.
In its way, a little longer, obviously, than haiku, but I do really like it.
So which do you think is harder to do? Is that the hardest form to do, that short form?
I think they're all hard and all fun. Well, it's just true. I mean,
They are. It's true. You're right.
it is. They're all hard in different ways and fun in different ways.
Well, okay, so let's talk for a moment about your novels.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Stein novels, in particular Smoke and Lather, which I read recently and thoroughly enjoyed. I'm no pun intended, I'm not blowing smoke or lather. I had a great time reading this book. It was so much fun. Tell the listeners about Harry Stein. How did you dream him up?
The title of the book will probably give you an idea how I dreamed him up, and that is Smoke and Lather.
Yes.
It was a redo of Stein's Stoned. But, I grew up in the 60s, and, marijuana was illegal, and it was all exciting. And, you'll put towels under the door, and, there was always the danger of getting something terrible happening. In fact, once something terrible did happen. I'll tell you a funny story, which is when I was living in Los Angeles, I lived in the Hollywood Hills and had a house. Behind the house was just upwards, but at the top there was like a plot of land level, like 10 by 10. I had a little victory garden, as I call it, growing there, and the plants had gotten to be actually about as tall as I. And one day, my phone rings, and I answer it, and I get a call, and the voice says, "This Mr. Ackerman?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We understand you got some marijuana growing up there. I'd like to talk to you about it." Well, this is the police. I said, "Oh, yeah." Hama, hama, hama. I was Jackie Gleason. Hama, hama. I said, I don't know anything about marijuana, but if you're the police, I guess I can't stop you from coming here. He said, well, yeah, we're gonna come up in about a half hour, 45 minutes, if that's all right. Well, here's what I thought. I was as naive then as I was with the producers when they were saying you couldn't find your first act. I thought they were being kind. I thought they were being, well, okay, we'll give this guy a break. It's just nonsense, to bust somebody for a few plants. So I ran up there and started yanking them out of the ground and hurling them over the fence into somebody else's. It broke my heart to do it because I'd nurtured them from seeds, and this was months, and now they're. And after I'd thrown about half a dozen up, they jumped out of the bushes where they were hiding and snapping pictures and putting me under arrest. And I was humiliated. My arrogance always stayed with me. I just thought, cops and me, who's the smarter one? Well, no question. Of course, it's me. Wrong again. I mean, it's one thing to be, busted by the cops, being overpowered, but to be outthought, it was so humiliating to me. And so I was brought downstairs back into the house, handcuffed, hands behind my back, and my dog is there licking their hands, and it was awful. But part of that gave me the reason. But actually, a first line, and this has happened occasionally, a first line came to me, and I didn't know where it came from or anything. But the line was, "The phone rang too early for it to be good news."
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a pretty damn good line. I had no idea who the phone was calling, who was on one end or the other. And then I had this character answer the phone, and suddenly he was filled, it's early, who's calling? And suddenly just a flood of possibility, came to me. I was divorced at the time, had an ex-wife and a joint custody of a child, and suddenly he was dreading the ex-wife's calling. Anyway, that was the impetus. Suddenly when something happened, it's like playing jazz or playing, 3-on-3 basketball. When you get in a groove, suddenly just everything just starts to flow. When you're playing jazz, music just starts, you find the groove, just stuff that you never thought about just starts to happen. And if you're playing basketball, suddenly you've never played with these guys before, but suddenly a rhythm is found, and when the guy's going to cut, and when to make the pick, and how to switch on defense, and it just starts to happen. And this started to happen, for me with that story, and it became about the stolen marijuana, and I started thinking about him and the circumstance he was in, that he used to be a real activist, and 20 years ago believed in the 60s, because this took place in the 90s. He believed that all the ethos of the 60s, but nobody else did. Everybody was gone. All the hippies that he knew were either dead or in jail or had become lawyers, even worse. So, and he loved that life, but there was a proscription. He couldn't live that life. Here's something that my training in school taught me, that I taught the students, and then by teaching them, whatever in a movie that you want to occur, make sure that as you think of that, you are twinning it with the very thing that will prevent it from happening. Because here's something that makes movies predictable. When the writer wants something to happen, and because they want that to happen, it happens. They cause it to happen without opposition. But if you, in the very time that you're thinking about this, I want this to happen, you make sure that you are coming up also with something that will prevent it from happening. You have created the absolute driving blood of every good movie, which is conflict. You have desire and opposition, and that creates empathy for a character. Character wants something, can't have it. What is, that makes us want the character to achieve it. So, this Harry Stein, he wanted to still to be living the life of the 60s, all of that, but he had an ex-wife and he had a daughter that he was crazy about, that he wanted custody of, but she had put into their joint custody agreement that he is prohibited from doing anything deleterious to the upbringing of the child. So he had to get a job and cut his hair and sell a VW van and live the appearance of a conservative life. So now that's the given. Well, now what happens to that? Somebody who knows about his past, has had some marijuana stolen, knows about Stein's past, and plants as a gift and an inducement a bud of this incredible weed that he himself has grown as an inducement for Stein to come help him find the weed, and he's going to pay him a great deal of money, and it's a chance for him to do what he loves doing and be back in the world that he loves, but he has to keep it a secret from his family. So there's conflict already built into every aspect of it, the moment to moment, and in the larger, and in the larger moments. And he's going to get caught, and what's at stake. The possible loss of his custodyship with his daughter. That ongoing tension exists there, and he, of course, tries to resist it, and does resist it until something larger than that happens. This gorgeous, beautiful woman, of course, it's film noir.
Gotta be.
Who's a friend of the this marijuana dealer, cultivator, whose name, I got to tell you, I was swimming at the UCLA pool.
Okay.
And I finished my lap, and on the concrete right above the pool, there was a kickboard. And on the kickboard is the name of the person who owns the kickboard. And the name of that person is Good Pasture. There is the name for my cultivator. I mean, it was incredible. It was just sitting there waiting. I mean, how do you not use that name for a cultivator? Good Pasture. I mean, it was there. And I hung around, and a couple of days later, I saw it again, and I saw the owner, and I met her. We became friends. And we still are friends. And her husband and I became friends, and she and her daughter are coming out in a couple of days to come to LA. I mean, anyway. So now he resists. This lovely woman comes and tries to induce him. Oh God, he wants so bad, but she says that he's going to be in trouble. Please help us, and he can't, and he won't. And then she gets murdered. Well, now he has all of that incredible guilt on his hands because he refused somebody in need, which goes against all the ethos of the 60s, that he ever believed in. So he's guilt on top of his head, so now he's just got to be in it.
So how much of Harry Stein is you? All of it?
How much is it? Well, I'd say, let me see. I would say a lot of the inner life of Harry, some of the outer life in the sense of the divorce thing and the daughter, but he had more balls than I, and got much more actively involved in protest movements and brazen things that he did than I ever had the courage to actually do.
And you've never been a detective.
I've never been a detective. That's also true. Yes, that's right.
Do you think that the fact that now, all these years later, cannabis in many states is now legal,
Yeah,
whether medicinally legal or completely recreationally legal, do you think that makes the stories anachronistic at this point?
it's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, at the time, I think they were like, they could have been a rallying point. Now, I think it probably is more like nostalgia. I guess I don't really, it's hard to say. It's hard to say.
It makes it a little trickier to sell as something dangerous because it's no longer thought so.
Yes, that's true. But the actual danger that actually does take place, I think it could suspend your disbelief because, when there are bad people taking valuable things from good people, whatever that thing may be, you feel something about that.
Mhm.
And, part of the story goes into Amsterdam and to all the coffee houses and the cannabis cup, which I think is still an interesting spectacle because even though cannabis is now legal, I don't think a lot of people have actually gone to that thing. It takes you into a kind of world that even these days, somebody, a world of like the '60s, that people who are alive. I mean, the '60s are a long time ago already.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, they are. Oh my God. So yeah,
So, okay, so now you're not a detective. You didn't come up writing detective stories, I assume. That was not your bailiwick.
right.
How much did you have to start to think about detailed plotting and planning before you started? Did you do outlining on these books, or did you just freeform it?
At first, I tried to freeform it, and I wrote about, I don't know, 80 or so pages, which was roughly Stein driving around Los Angeles, being pissed off at everything he saw and critical of everything he saw. And then at a certain point, I looked at it and I said, "Who cares? What self-indulgent crap this is? If anyone's going to, be at all interested, this has to be a story." And so I then, what the hard work. I composed a plot around that. The reason that it's called Smoke and Lather is because it's about smoke, which is that marijuana smoke, and also there was a second plot which involved the job that he had, which was this boring, horrible job that he had, working for a reinsurance company that kept sending him on these just ridiculously, mind-numbingly boring jobs. The most recent one that he's involved in, as the book starts, when the phone rings, which is not his ex-wife, but somebody from this shampoo factory. His job has been counting empty plastic designer shampoo bottles. So the secondary plot is about counterfeit designer shampoo, something he couldn't care less about, but it pays the thing, it's his contribution to the gross national product, which is what he has to do to satisfy his ex-wife. And there are specific things that he's called upon to do to try to solve what's happening, with this missing shampoo, this missing counterfeit shampoo. And it brings us into a whole other a group of characters, and many of whom I invented, and some of whom are based upon people that I knew. And that was so much fun. And so it was fun. It was like this push and pull. I've had this circumstance happening in many stories that I've written and that I've described, where a character is pulled from two sides, two powerful forces that both mean a lot to the character, pulling him. I described it as a trout being caught by anglers on two sides of a stream. So he has this thing going on, and it leads to two different things. It leads to the possibility of a structure of alternating, a chapter about this and a chapter about that, and being pulled from here to there and from there to here. It allowed for real interesting movement in the story. It allowed the possibility of, when the action goes to, like the shampoo plot, and then it can come back to the marijuana plot by implying action that you don't even have to necessarily describe. You can jump ahead of something that has happened and make reference to it without having to actually go through it. So they were complementary to each other. And the Stein Stung story, which was about
Bees.
honeybees being stolen, did the same thing. There was that plot, and there was a secondary plot. I enjoy that. It's fun to work that way, and that sort of came to be my own little Bible.
In the 3 books, did you need to do a lot of research beyond having smoked marijuana? Did you need to do a lot of research?
Yes, in the one about honeybees, I spent quite a lot of time in the Central Valley, in the almond groves, among the beekeepers. They are a really, really interesting lot. The bees are like migrant workers. They are carried there, hundreds of them, millions of them, are brought season to season, mostly in the almond, because the almonds have become very, very profitable, and more land has been dedicated to almonds, and they require pollination at the same time. So millions of bees are there working, and then they go up north to the cherry orchards, and and these people are really they're migratory, really interesting folks. And that was fun.
So I want to ask you this question that I ask many people on the show that I'm curious to hear your answer.
Yeah,
You've obviously dealt with lots of stories in your career and life
yeah.
and many students and your own. What for you makes a good story good?
For me, what involves me is characters, especially characters that I don't know very well, into whose life I can dwell, whose life becomes interesting by the things that they want and are withheld from them generally. The poignancy of trying to find something true and meaningful in a world that does not support that very often. There's the many combinations of we don't know ourselves often, what it is we really want. And then if we ever discover what that is, finding it, whether it exists or not, and if it exists, whether it is available to us or not, all of those poignant things, trying to find some modicum of happiness for real in a world in which, where the attainment of that is difficult and comes sometimes by surprise and doesn't last as long as we wish. And so stories that can touch that, and so and stories do that in such incredibly different ways. Films, novels. The quest for something lasting and meaningful in characters, that we can believe, and they don't have to be good people. So I'd say for me it's that.
Well, I think part of it, and you've already spoken about it today, which is that I think part of what makes a great story great or a good story good is this notion of conflict, that you're drawn in by that conflict. And I did want to point out for the listeners that you taught me one of the great formulas of all time in terms of being a storyteller, and that's the formula of C equals D plus O. Conflict equals desire plus an obstacle. I got that from you.
Yeah.
And I've repeated it hundreds and hundreds of times to people. And it's a very important concept. And I think that concept, once you have that, and you have it in spades in your books, is once you have that conflict set up, you get drawn to the protagonist or whatever characters you're dealing with at that moment,
Yes.
as long as they're in conflict, especially with other characters.
Yes. I mean, what you just described is the craft that is required to accomplish, that other thing.
Yes, because you have to have that emotion, the emotional part of it.
Yes. Yes.
Without it, it's just, stuff. It doesn't relate to humans, and we have to relate to it in some way.
Yes. When you talked about the difference between form and format, one of the very early things that I do in a class, because when we were in high school, or whenever we're learning to read books, and teachers who have never written teach the book. I don't know if that's your experience, but almost universally they'll say, well, what they will open a conversation about is, what's the theme of this book? What is the writer trying to teach us?
Mm-hmm.
Because so many, we read like Aesop's fables when we're children, and the purpose of that is to teach a lesson. And teachers will look at theme. What is the meaning of it? And very often, beginning writers will start with the notion of a theme, what this is meant to mean. I draw a circle on the board and I write the word theme in the middle of it, and then I put a big line through it, and it's like a traffic sign that says you can't go here. And I say, I don't want you to think about theme, because if you have a theme, you will be locked into making the theme of that story come out. Adultery leads to murder. That's the theme of the story. Well, once there's been adultery, you can tell there's going to be a murder. So I then erase the word theme in there, and I write in the word that you just mentioned, which is desire.
Right.
And that has to be the driving force. What does a character want? What are they going to do to get it? And I use that stupid word, wadugi, which means what does a character want for the wa, and what does a character do to get it? Wadugi, what want, do, get. And that makes it unpredictable. And it allows what might be called anti-heroes to become the center of stories. And I often use the first example that always comes to mind is one of the first movies I saw a long time ago called Heavenly Creatures, Peter Jackson's first movie, which is about two girls that want to be together. It's based on a true story. That's all they want, and their parents want to separate them. And there is the basic conflict of every scene in that movie. Somebody wants to be together. Somebody wants to separate them. Like in All the President's Men, they want to cover the story. The bad guys want to, they want to uncover rather. The bad guys want to cover up, uncover. Every scene is about that conflict. Anyway, in Heavenly Creatures, in order to accomplish what they want, they bash with a brick. They bash one of the mother's heads in. Well, if that was a movie about theme, you would have to hate these girls. You would have to so hate them. How do you go? You can't say matricide is cool, but because the story is based on desire, not on theme, intimacy goes with desire. Those two things have to be locked together. We have to be deep into not their underwear drawer, but what is important to them morally, consciously in their lives. And what these girls wanted was to be together. That was their intimacy, and we invested in that. And we actually, in a strange kind of way, forgave that because we were intimate with them
Sure.
and a little bit more distant from the parents. They just existed as an oppositional force.
But they had to build empathy for those two girls early on, or the audience would not have locked onto them.
Exactly. Exactly. The beginning of The Godfather. Somebody comes to him, and this is brilliant. It's a brilliant, brilliant opening. Somebody comes, tells this great, great story about what happened to his daughter. Who can't relate to that horrible thing, and then compounds it. He went to the cops. He was a good American, and they let the boys off with a suspended sentence. This guy was just absolutely humiliated. And even if we don't have a daughter who's had that happen, we all understand what humiliation feels like. We all know what it feels like to do the right thing and be thwarted. And he was so on our side. We wanted good for him because he had suffered. And he comes to the Godfather and whispers, what he wants. And we know what he's whispered. And every one of us, I absolutely know this to be true. We're waiting for the Godfather to say, yes, we will waste those fuckers. And that's what the audience wanted. And he said, no. You're asking for murder. These boys didn't kill your daughter. And from the beginning of that story, the Godfather has a higher moral conscience than everyone else in the audience. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It could have opened with him machine gunning an olive, factory,
Sure.
Which he probably has done. But the opening of a scene, the opening of the movie is so important because it is through that you invest. It's not just once upon a time. It's, we invest in the character by what action we place that character into at the beginning of the story.
100% true. There's no reason in the world why we should like Randall Patrick McMurphy
Right.
in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's a loathsome character, but we absolutely love him because he takes care of these guys, and he takes these mentally challenged guys and he cares for them.
Yep.
So by his caring for them, we care for him.
Right.
And yet he's not anyone you'd want in your house for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, that's a miracle to me when a story comes out and it can get there. The Stein books, you have characters in there that are not particularly nice people. They're a little bit offbeat and a little bit, they're just not nice, but they are people that we care about because of the way you've developed them. Do you think those books are ever going to get made into movies or TV series? I think they should be.
Well, I would love it if that happened. It hasn't yet. Of course, I think it would be a terrific series. Again, a throwback into a different era, a renegade. We like renegades at any time, and I would like it to happen.
I, for one, would watch, and I think that Harry's a great character. He's a nice, laid-back, laconic character that's very smart, but he's challenged at every step, and I think that that's what makes him wonderful to watch. Well, I have been having the most fun conversation I've had in a while with my old professor, Hal Ackerman, and we're going to wind the show down just a little bit. You've told us a whole lot of really fantastic advice, as usual, but I'm wondering if you have a story that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, or just plain funny, more than you've already told us.
Well, I have several, really. When I first came, two funny things happened when I first came out to LA. Somebody gave me the number of an agent, and I called, and his secretary said, "Oh, he's on another call. He'll get back to you." Well, I sat at the phone, because somebody said he's going to get back, and so I said, didn't get back that day. This went on for about the next month, maybe longer, and maybe longer. I kept really expecting that he was going to call back because I would call every day. And finally, he called back, and we talked, and I said it would send me, and he said, "Okay, send the script." Well, I didn't want to risk mailing it, so I brought it there, left it there, and early in the morning, and I thought to myself, let's see, should I call in the afternoon? Give him a couple of hours to read it, or should I wait till the next day? Yeah. So about, I don't know, I guess I started calling a few days later. And again, that went on. And finally, probably after a month, he called and brought me in for a meeting. So, oh, great. Came in, so happy, a little bit pissed that it took that long for him to read the script, but gratified that finally he didn't recognize the value of it. So he said, he wanted to sign me. I said, "Oh, that's really good. So you like the script?" He said, "Well, I haven't really read it." but I liked your persistence. So the first meeting he sets me up with is with a French director. I think his name was Christian Marquand. And he was living in Malibu. Wow, Malibu, just the word sounds so rich. So my girlfriend, I guess, I don't think I was married at the time yet. We decided to, drive out there like an hour earlier, just get a sense of Malibu. It was golden. It was wintertime, and, which means it was 70 degrees and gorgeous. And, people cupboarding on the beach, thinking that that's what you do in the wintertime. And, I'm from New York, and I don't know, you freeze in the winter, you don't play on the beach, but all right. So comes, the meeting time, 4:00. In Malibu, the entrance to the houses are on the beach, not on the road.
Right.
So, you walk around and ring the bell, no answer, ring the bell, no answer, ring the bell. And alongside the door, there's sort of like a semi-translucent glass panels. And so you can see, it's not transparent, but you can get a sense of motion inside. And what I'm thinking of seeing is several scantily or unclad females, running about. And Marquand, opens the door, and he's heavy-lidded, sleepy-eyed, wearing a robe, looking at me and having no the fuck idea who I am and what I'm doing here. The only thing the agent had neglected to do was to send the script to him or tell him that I was coming.
But there you were.
There I were. So he said, give me a half hour. So we walk around, and, I think we should just leave. We come in, he's gracious. We have a glass of wine, and, he doesn't know why I'm there. He's not read the script. And so we just beat a polite retreat.
May I assume that was a no sale?
Yes. Yeah. So that was interesting. Another much shorter story, but kind of poignant. The very first party that I went to, I'd gotten a mentor, a man who's died, but I really treasure my relationship with him. His name was Leonard Stern.
Mm-hmm.
He had written, for the Honeymooners, and he created Mad Libs and created a bunch of shows, and just the loveliest man. When I was writing for him, working with him, we worked together on a script, and he kept me late at the studio. He sent a bouquet of flowers to my wife. I mean, he's just gracious. He also gave me the best critique. It was 3 words to a script that I've ever gotten. 3 words were, write this better.
Write this better?
Write this better. That was the reaction to something I turned in once.
Wasn't he also a publisher?
Yes. In fact, his company published my screenwriting book. It was called Tall Fellow Press. But there was a party, and I think it was at his house, and there was a lot of luminaries there. But among them was Philip Epstein. Now, Philip Epstein, if the name rings a bell to you, maybe to your listeners, wrote Casablanca.
That's all. Along with his brother Julius, right?
Along with Julius, yes. So, in fact, it was Julius that was there, come to think of it. It was Julius that was there. Thank you for correcting me. It was Julius that was there. And, with great trepidation, I came up to him and, bowed deeply and, and as one would. You got a book, The 100 Greatest Lines, in movies, he's got 30 of them.
Of course.
So, I say, sir, I had an opening because I somehow I knew that he'd grown up in Brooklyn near Ocean Parkway, and I had lived near Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. So it was my way of sort of getting some sort of contact. Like, why would he possibly care about talking to this, anyway. So I say, sir, Casablanca. He said, it was a big mess. That was not what I expected to hear. He said, yeah, they messed it all up. It was a mishmash. And then he said something that I will never forget. He said, they cut my last line.
Oh.
Well, the last line of Casablanca is fairly well known.
Fairly well known.
And so, I said, I was Jackie Gleason, so I was hama, again. I said, may one have the temerity to ask, sir, what that last line was. Well, last line is the beginning of the beautiful friendship, and he said his last line was, but you still owe me 5,000, 50,000 francs, or whatever it was. So that's good enough, So whether his last line was better or whether it was better to be cut, what I came away with was, here is this giant. Here is somebody that everybody looks up to. And the first thing he says to somebody he has just met 40 years after it has happened is that they cut his last line. He's still fucking pissed off all this time later, despite everything that he has to tell this person who he's never met, and he's still growling at him. And I understood at that moment what the life of a screenwriter was going to be. That this is, he has achieved the best that one could possibly wish for, and he is still fucking irked at what has happened to him because we don't own our copyright.
Because he didn't ultimately own all of it himself,
Right.
and what he owned in his mind was not what they did.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And so he's bitter about it.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of truth, isn't there, in the notion of art and artists, that an artist will look at a piece of work that they've done, and it could be Picasso or Matisse or whoever, and they see all the things that are wrong with it, that they didn't get right,
Yeah.
that they could have done better if they'd only had more time or thought about it in time.
Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
we all see it as this incredible piece of art. They see all the seams. They
Yeah.
see where it's all sewn together and doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
And that's true for writers, particularly writers, because
Yes.
the words are so malleable.
I went to a reading of I forget the guy's name now, but it was at the music center downtown LA. It was a group of people, and this guy was reading it, and what he was reading from was a book that had just won the Pulitzer Prize.
Okay.
So, and there's a Q&A afterwards, and somebody raises his hand, and he's got the book. I said, "Sir, I was I thought we had the same edition, but there were some lines that in my book that you didn't read, and there were some others that weren't in my edition that that you did read." And the writer sheepishly it was the exact same edition of the book, turned it around so he could see it. And in that book that has just won the Pulitzer Prize, he's crossed out a bunch of lines written in pen.
Stephen Sondheim, who I consider to be the greatest musical theater writer of all, that's just my own particular taste and opinion.
I agree.
He notoriously kept fiddling around with classics years after they were great successes. I mean, he fiddled around with West Side Story 40 years, 50 years after it had been a huge hit on Broadway and was well known and so on. So artists, they're never satisfied with the end of the work. I don't think it's the audience that becomes satisfied. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I forget what French poet it was that said, "No work of art is ever finished, only abandoned."
I think that's right. All right. So last question for you today, Hal.
Yes.
Can you share with us, obviously more than you've given us, a piece of advice that you think is useful for those that are just starting out in the business, or maybe they've been in a little bit and trying to get to that next level?
Well, the best I can say is create inventory. Don't think that the first thing that you do is precious. Don't harbor the illusion that is going to be the thing that is going to be, that's going to send you into the stratosphere. Don't try to second guess trends. And I think the really important thing is don't doubt your own life. I never remember who among you students was there at the same time as each other. But this past summer, a student named Nicole Rigel had a film that came out called Dandelion. It's her second film. And I remember when she came into class the first time, she's from West Virginia. And at the end of the first meeting, when everyone was introducing themselves, she stayed late. She stayed after and said she had real doubts that she belonged here at all, listening to the qualifications and the experience that everybody, the classmates had. She said, she comes from this little holler, West Virginia, and does anything that she has to say have any relevance? And she doubted it. And I said, first of all, you're here. And that means that whatever you have already produced, was enough for us to say this person, has something. But I really did try to encourage her to say that for her not to doubt her life, and that if she could tell the truth about the characters in her life, this would mean that she could write something that no other human being on the planet could write. And I think that all of us have something of that, whether we come from the holler or we come from from San Fernando Valley, where there seems to be everybody just like us. We all have a story that nobody else in the universe can tell in the same way that we can tell it. And I think that if we give honor to that truth and write that as a sample of who we are, that movie may not get made, that script may not be made, but that will be the thing that will highlight your talent as somebody who can create characters and dialogue and truth and empathy, and that will get, that can get you, assignment. Somebody, is looking for somebody who can do just that. They see that script and they say, okay, this writer, you've never been to Hawaii, but this story takes place in Hawaii, but it's about characters like the ones that you wrote about in Tennessee. We're going to fly you to Hawaii, whatever. That experience has duplicated itself, replicated itself many times in the experience that I've had with students. So,
well, this is, of course, as I expected, such wise advice, because what I think a lot of people forget when they're trying to start a career is they try to be like what's in the world, what's in Hollywood, what's out in the theaters. Instead of trying to be who they are, they're trying to be what other people are.
yes.
And just be you and do the best you can with that. Because it's never, as Julius Epstein points out, it's never going to be perfect for you.
Yes.
Even if you've written what everybody else thinks is perfect, right? So do the best that you can and create that art, I think, for yourself. I think create it not for others, create it for what makes you happy.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Hal Ackerman, this has been so much fun today, and I cannot thank you enough for your second trip down this road with me. And I thank you for your wisdom and for your energy and for just being you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, I had a great time being here. If I could plug one particular little product.
Sure, please.
There's a thing called Creative Live, and I have a video on there. It's called The Art of the First Draft. And people who might be interested in sort of taking the semblance of a class, it's offered pretty inexpensively. And I would say that if anyone enjoyed, hearing our conversation, they might enjoy investing about $15 or $20.
Do you know what the site is so that we can make sure that we put it up?
It's called Creative Live.
Is it creativelive.com?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
We'll make sure that we put it up on the website as well for anyone that's missed it.
Great, I appreciate that.
So, Hal, thank you so much for doing this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
No more than me. It's great talking to you.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. Story Beat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.